Hey, everybody, and welcome to our latest installment of the online children's lit class, Monday edition of week 6. We only have 2 more weeks to go. Things are really flying by, and thank you for sticking it out with me and staying with me on all this. Just a couple of things on the agenda for today. I want to explain the homework, obviously, for before Thursday's lecture, and it involves wonder, which I'm hopeful that you have read up to where I wanted you to read, so you don't have too much more to read for before Wednesday at midnight, because that's when the assignment will be due, obviously. And um, we'll go over wonder in more detail than in the Thursday video and lecture. And then next week, we're going to take on excuse me, historical fiction, and take a look at 2 works of historical fiction, which would be Number of the Stars and Towers Falling. And that will take us to the end of the semester. And along with that, the final paper and the final exam. But I'm not going to lay too much on you today. I'll be preparing you for that, but that's what's coming up in the next 2 weeks as we wrap things up. Um, we have one last group of presenters that also will need to turn those in shortly, as I will talk a little bit about today. So those are the things that are remaining. Relatively short video today. Like I said, I want to explain the homework, and then we will talk a little bit about Bridge to Terabithia, which was our first example of realistic fiction, and discuss how realistic it is. And then I think that's pretty much it. Um, your precepts assignments are coming in. Again, I'm recording this on Sunday for Monday broadcast. And so I don't have all the precepts in yet. So far, what I have so far has been really good. But I will compile those, and then that'll be among the things we will talk about in Thursday's lecture. So that's always a lot of fun and interesting to go over. A lot of words of wisdom coming from you guys. So thank you all for that. The Chelsea the Chelsea update, she's around here somewhere. Hopefully she'll make an appearance before we're done. Okay, let's talk first about the homework. And here it is. And speaking of Chelsea, um, let me fix this here first. There, that's better. Speaking of Chelsea, she has now taken on the job of guard kitty for Shank Manor. And there you can see, beware, guard cat is on duty, and she's ready to go. And she will scratch out the eyes of any squirrel or fly, or God forbid, a neighborhood cat who comes anywhere near the front porch, or God forbid gets inside the house. So that's her job, to keep the house safe from uh, neighborhood cats and squirrels. And she's a really good fly catcher. There's been a couple of flies that have gotten into the house in the last couple of weeks, and she is really good. She is fast, so she's earning her keep. I wouldn't just let her hang around just because she's cute. She actually has a job to perform. She actually has a role to pay her way. So she works her way to earn her friskies. Um, anyway, I don't know how much help she would be if somebody actually came into the house, but I know her claws are sharp, so she might do some damage. Anyway, here is the assignment due by midnight, Wednesday, July 30th. Again, watch this video. This is the Monday, July 28th video, and obviously take note of the numbers in sequence. And let me give you a first one, number 29. 29 is our first number. All right, and then I would like you to finish reading Wonder. Maybe you already have. I don't know. I tried to make the reading a little bit easier by breaking it up into halves, because I knew I wouldn't be talking about Wonder, particularly in this video, but I didn't want to just say, okay, read all of Wonder by Thursday because that'd be a lot. So I thought I'd give you a chance to use some of the weekend to read as far as you could. And maybe some of you went ahead and read to the end or whatever, but I wanted you to read halfway through. So long story short, I guess it's too late, but finish reading Wonder. And then there's some pages in the packet I'd like you to read 190 to 193. Also, a couple of other articles in the packet, 228 to 242. Read the articles about apartheid in children's literature and the multicultural article. And then there's a Canvas article that I'd also like you to take a look at. And it's in sequence, it's in order of the things we're doing in Canvas, so you'll see it pretty easily. It's titled Why Adults Should Read Children's Books. So read that article. Now, if you are in the realistic slash historical group of presenters, your written presentation is due as well. I think there are 4 students that applies to. So when you turn in the highlighted questions in the wonderful stuff assignment, which I'm going to go through in a minute, also turn in the same email, but separate, turn in your presentation. And I will compile those and probably have those available to the rest of the class by this weekend. And then finally, I will go over in Thursday's lecture the final exam and give you a preview of the final exam and what's going to be on it and how it will be set up. And because, like I said, we are heading toward the end of the semester. It's hard to imagine, but we are. So finish reading Wonder, do some reading in the Canvas, including the packet. If you are in the realistic historical group of presenters, your presentation is due in that email. And then for everybody, here is the 30-point writing assignment quiz on Wonder that I'm going to ask you to have done by Thursday's video. And let me share that with you. All right, these are the wonderful quiz questions. See what I did there? I'm so clever. That's why they pay me the big money. Now, there are a lot of questions here. And by the way, I might as well get to this right away. Disregard, obviously, the second part, the Shank class precepts. You have already done that. In summer, I kind of switched the order of the assignments. So usually in a regular class period in a regular semester, we read all of Wonder, we discuss the questions, and then we do the precepts. But I thought I'd have you read half of Wonder and then do the precepts, and then we could finish it. So we do it a little bit differently in the summer. So obviously, this is an assignment you have already done, this last part. So you can disregard that. And this is a picture of me. I don't know why I thought it was appropriate, but the older I get, the more I look like that again. I think at one point I'll probably lose my front teeth, and I look like an old man when I was 8, and I'm starting to look like an old man again. So I'm going to probably look like that in a couple more years. Anyway, as I said, there are a number of questions here, 16 altogether, but I would like you to, well, you can look them all over in lieu of discussion, and maybe some of these other things will come up in my lecture on Wonder on Thursday. But the ones I want you to focus on are the ones that are highlighted in yellow, and I think they're all pretty self-explanatory. Oh, and I couldn't get rid of this. 14 is the number is highlighted, but the rest of the question isn't, you don't have to answer number 14. It is a wonderful movie adaptation. Came out, I don't know. I always think it's always a few years ago, and then I look at the date and it's like, oh my God, that came out 10 years ago. I'm not sure. It's been relatively recent, 5 or 6 years ago. A really good adaptation of this book that I heartily recommend. I've said this before. This is my favorite book, and it's a really good movie too. It's my favorite book of the semester. It's not my all-time favorite book, but so anyway, disregard number 14. But I do want you to answer 1, 2, 4, 8, 9, 10, 11. And this will be interesting for the sake of our discussion. Uh, Answer number 12, because obviously, we're putting this book in the realistic fiction category, so we have to discuss how realistic is it, given the situation and the kind of life Augie leads, and how the rest of the school reacts to him and other students. And, there are a lot of other kinds of issues that are happening in the story that don't just involve Augie. So that will be maybe I don't know, single most important discussion question, but answer all of them. But number 12 is kind of what we're leading up to. So if you think there are some unrealistic aspects to the story, uh, that will be your opportunity to give some examples of that. Um, I guess that's all the explanation I really need. Um, Looking them over. Well, I think after Augie, Via is the most compelling character. Um, you don't have to agree with me, but I guess for the sake of the question, you do have to kind of agree with me. Give reasons to support his correct point of view. So notice how modest I am uh, on that. Most students tend to agree with me. I think V is a very interesting character after Augie. But anyway, so answer those highlighted questions dealing with wonder, and have those turned in by midnight Wednesday, if at all possible. And then Thursday's video, we will discuss wonder in full. And also, sadly, um, we can't do this in a summer class, but I usually like to show some scenes from the movie version, usually a little bit of the beginning and a little bit of the end, to a class if it's in a classroom situation. We don't have that opportunity to do that here, obviously. Plus, I don't think we really have the time to do it, to be honest. But again, it is a movie adaptation that I would recommend. If you enjoyed the book, I think you'll enjoy the movie very much as well. When I first heard that it was going to be made into a movie, and it was going to star Julia Roberts and Owen Wilson as the parents, I immediately thought, oh my God, this is going to be one of those adaptations where they change the whole focus of the movie from the kids to the parents, because we have two pretty big stars playing the parents, and their story is going to take precedence over Augie and the kids. And it really isn't like that. It really isn't like that. The focus and the emphasis is still on Augie and his friends, and his trials and tribulations, and his sisters as well. But both Julia Roberts and Owen Wilson do a wonderful job as the parents, but they don't take over the movie, which is what I was afraid was going to happen. So again, I really recommend the movie for you. Okay, let me give you another number. Since it's going to be kind of a short video today, I want to get some numbers in. 99 will be our second number. All right, another couple of things I want to touch on real quick before we get to Bridge to Terabithia, just to kind of call it to your attention. I'm sure you're aware of this already, but I wanted to just show you, first of all, here are the group of fantasy science fiction presentations. And again, I asked you to read these for today. And I said in my video, they weren't posted when I made my last video, but I said they would be posted before the next video. And here they are. So we have Olivia's, we have Sophia's, we have Teresa's, and we have Bailey's. So if you have not, please read these. They're all very well done. And again, they can be a part of the final exam. There will be a question on the final exam on the student presentations. So make sure you familiarize yourself with the student presentations. And the other thing I wanted to share with you, because this is now posted in Canvas, are the author profiles that I have so far. And that's most of them. There's still a couple that are outstanding, but here are most of them. And again, I'm not going to make this part of the curriculum. You don't have to study these. I'm not going to ask you a question about them on the final exam. This is more just FYI. And particularly since you all did a wonderful job on these, I encourage you to take a little bit of time to look over the author profiles that each of you have done. And by the way, uh, I'm not technically proficient. For some reason, Sophia's subheading showed up um, on all the different pages here, and I couldn't figure out a way to delete this. I'm sure somebody will email me and say, Shank, this is how you do it. And I know there's a way to do it, but I didn't want to spend a half hour figuring it out. So that's why you see that. And that's my bad. Um, I, I, I goofed up. Imagine that. It's the first mistake I've made in 87 years of teaching. So anyway, here are the different uh, author profiles, each one giving some background information about the author or illustrator, then giving some of their most well-known works, and then summarizing and analyzing one particular work from the author or illustrator. And most of you did very well on this. If you lost some points, it was probably because by the time you got to the analysis part of looking at a particular work by the author, you were running out of space or time or whatever. And some of the analysis was a little bit quick. Uh, but for the most part, these were all well done. Even the ones where the analysis was a little quick still got a relatively good grade. Um, and again, maybe some of these you're familiar with, maybe you aren't. And if you read about them, it might make you want to be familiar with them or check out some of the work of these people you haven't heard of, including Dave Pilkey. I made the comment to Lydia in my email. I knew Dave Pilkey had gone to Kent State University, but for some reason I thought he had graduated, but apparently he did not graduate, but he did go here, and so we can claim him even though he wasn't a graduate. Um, Roald Dahl, and by the way, Mac's analysis of Roald Dahl was very critical. So I think it's always interesting to read critical analyses of these authors' work. And again, this kind of goes back to the discussion I had kind of as a sidelight. I think was it last video or the video before, I can't remember, talking about the whole issue of can you still enjoy the work of somebody if you find out they're a really awful person, or um, in some cases, you take a second look at a work and realize that it might end up being racist or sexist or problematic. So these are the kinds of questions we've been trying to pose all semester long, and so check out Mac's analysis of Roald Dahl. Um, Lemony Snicket, love Lemony Snicket. So these are the ones I had so far. And if I have time, uh, when the other ones come in, I may add them to this and then repost it on Canvas. But for now, here are the author profiles that were completed. And so enjoy reading those as I did. So there you go. Let me give you another number, 79. 79 will be our third number. All right, let's take a look at The Bridge of Terabithia, which has, I think, become a classic. And there have been two movie versions of this work over the years. One was done like in the 80s. And again, this is the kind of thing I usually have a little bit of time to do in a classroom situation that I can't in this class. Usually show a few scenes from the more recent version, which I thought was a pretty good adaptation of the book. It stars Josh Hutcherson, who also later played Peeta in the Hunger Games series. He plays Jess, and it's a pretty good adaptation. I think it came out 15, 20 years ago. like I said before the Hunger Games. Um, and then there's one that came out like in the 80s um, that I always like to show a couple of scenes from because it is terrible. It is like god awful. It's like a TV movie really made on the cheap. And the young actor who plays Jess is just god awful. And I think hopefully that was the only movie the kid ever made before they, I don't know, took him out and shot him or whatever. But he was just, oh, and we're going to talk about the stages of grief and how realistically these are shown in the book. Well, in the movie from the 90s, uh, it's not really the actor's fault, it's how it was written. But the kid goes through all five stages of grief in about a minute and a half scene. I mean, I'm shocked. I deny it. I'm angry. I'll accept it. And all of within, like about a minute. And it's just, oh, if you have a chance, you might want to YouTube it. I think it's on YouTube. YouTube, look up Bridge of Terabithia from I think it's the 1980s, and you'll see what I mean. The more recent version is much better, but it is, I think, considered a classic. Deals with an issue, a serious issue that children have to deal with at some point in their childhood, most likely. The death of, I think most likely it might occur, a death of a family member, most likely a grandparent or a great grandparent, um, uncles, siblings. I mean, that of course can be among the most devastating things that can happen, but also perhaps the death of a peer, a friend, a neighbor. Death becomes something that has to be addressed in a young person's life, particularly as they get older. I think the older somebody gets, the more they sort of appreciate the ramifications of what death really is. I mean, if you're 5 years old and your great grandparent dies and you ask, "Where's my great grandparent? Where's Papa?" They could probably answer it by saying, "Well, he's in heaven and he's looking down on you." And a 5-year-old will say, "Okay," and be sad for a while. But as you get older, um, the relationships become deeper, and therefore the loss becomes more devastating. And I think the benefit of this book, which we'll get to in a minute, and I've read through your answers to this question, and it seems like most of you agree with me. I think it's important for kids to know how to grieve. And there is no perhaps right or wrong way to grieve. And I think sometimes, especially movies for kids where somebody dies, it's kind of done in a very simplistic way. And you're not supposed to cry, or, the grieving process lasts 5 minutes and then you accept it. Whereas, it's perfectly natural and okay to grieve for as long as you need to grieve. Eventually, you'll probably hopefully come to that final stage, which is acceptance. But everybody gets there in their own way and their own time. And I think that's one of the things that's valuable about this book. I think it's one of the valuable lessons. There is no one way to grieve. You don't react any one way. It's actually a series of things that you feel, and that's okay. It's okay um, to go through this stage and take as long as you need in each stage, but always remembering that at some point, of course, um, we do have to move on. We do have to accept it and move on, and eventually, with the help of our support system, whether it's family, friends, professional help, whatever it might be, eventually we can reach that final stage and move on with our lives. It doesn't mean that we will forget the person we lost. They'll always be a part of us, but we know we need to move on. And I think the book, even though there are aspects of it that are dated, which we will talk about in a minute when we go over the questions, I think that's a universal theme. We kind of touched on it a little bit in Charlotte's Web, didn't we? You know, the whole story of Charlotte and how, death is a part of life, and Of course, she passes away by the end of the story, and Wilbur has to deal with her death. But again, this is a good example of what I was talking about. In a fantasy book for young children, um, the grief is relatively short-lived, and Wilbur, okay, I'm going to take care of Charlotte's babies, and everything's going to be fine, and everything's smiley by the end of the story, and he didn't have to go through the different stages of grief, at least not in several chapters. It might have just taken him a few pages to go through all those, but that's not really realistic. And a book like Terabithia is aimed for the older child who may be going through this and needs a little bit more of an answer to how to deal with all this than he or she might get from something like Charlotte's Web. So again, despite some of the dated aspects of the story and some of the weaknesses of the story, I think it does a really good job, I think, of showing most of the stages of grief. I'm still not sure about the bargaining stage, but I think the rest of them are pretty well represented in Jess's varied reactions to uh, the death of Leslie. So let's go through those questions. And I might touch on some of the other questions too that I didn't have you answer that weren't highlighted, but in the course of our discussion, they may come up. The setting of the story, this book was published in 1978, I believe, the late 70s, almost 50 years ago now. That's kind of hard to believe for me anyway. And it was meant to be a modern day story. So the time period is the late 70s, modern day times, and the place is a small farm community in, I would guess, Virginia, not too far from Washington, D.C. And so we have a very rural community. I don't want to ascribe, I don't know, a political slant to the book, but I think it's safe to say that you could call this a very conservative community. Um, and the Leslie's family, might be the more liberal uh, family from the big city who comes to live in the conservative small town farm community. That might be one way to shape the narrative, so to speak. And it's one of the ways Leslie is very different from the other kids. That was one of your questions. Um, so we're talking about a rural farm town in not West Virginia, I'm sorry, Virginia. And that certainly is important in understanding the implications of what happens in the story. It's one of the ways to understand why Leslie feels so out of place in the beginning. It also helps explain, why Jess is a bit of an outcast too. I mean, here's a kid who likes to use his imagination to draw fantastical animals, and he doesn't get a lot of support for that because boys aren't supposed to do that. Farm boys aren't supposed to do that. What are you doing wasting your time, drawing animals, kid? Go out and do your chores and be a man. That's the kind of thing that girls do. Um, so obviously, one of the things that's challenged in this book is, sexual identities and gender roles are challenged. And, Leslie certainly challenges the gender roles of the time. And Jess, in a more subtle way, does as well. And so you have two kids who kind of feel out of place in this setting, and they find one another. And it's part of the reason they create Terabithia as kind of an escape from the reality of this late 70s conservative farm community that really doesn't really kind of understand or accept either one of them because they're kind of different in terms of gender roles. Um, I shouldn't say everybody is dismissive of his wanting to draw. Um, and that kind of ties in with 2 and 3. The music teacher, Miss Edmonds, and again, this is the late 70s, so she's, this term was still used back then. She's kind of the hippie teacher that the kids have, the hippie music teacher. And this is usually the time in our discussion where I ask students, did in your school systems, did you have music teachers? Did you have art teachers? It's scary how a lot of these programs, due to funding cuts and so on. Um, I know when I went to school, in grade school, we had a music teacher and an art teacher who were situated in the school and they stayed there full time. Now, more and more, you hear stories about a teacher who might teach music in any number of different schools, uh, just to kind of make ends meet, or so to speak. And the same with art. This seems like these are the programs that usually are cut first if things have to be cut. So I'd like to think that all of you watching me had a healthy, uh, prosperous arts program for kids in grade school and middle school, including art and music. And she encourages him to draw because, she's a hippie and she wants to do that. But it's very significant that um, only she and Leslie really encourage him in his artistic endeavors. His family, particularly his father, again, to maintain gender roles, kind of frowns on it. And you get the sense that the father, thinks, well, that's a sissy thing to do, to use a term of the time. And so he kind of hides his creative and his imaginative uh, interests until Leslie shows up and encourages him as well. She sees a kindred soul in him because certainly she is a very imaginative and creative young girl. All right, so he loves to draw. He loves to draw fantastical animals. Um, and he kind of hides this his talent until this new girl shows up in town. And his very first meeting, I didn't ask you to answer this, but it's kind of symbolic and kind of foreshadowing a lot of things. But if you remember, the very first time he sees her, it's from a distance, and he thinks it's a boy because of the way she wears her hair and the kind of clothes she's wearing, pants and so on and so forth. So again, going very much against the gender role of the time. If you remember too, the first day of school, all the girls in class, in his class, wore their very finest dress the first day, and she was dressed much more casually. So, she was more inclined to dress like a boy than a girl. Again, to use another term of the time, we would have called her a tomboy at the time. Um, but he gets to know her, and of course there's any number of reasons why she's different. The one that affects him the most, at least in the beginning, is that she's not afraid to say, hey, I want to run with the boys. I can run as fast as any boy. I'm not going to stick with the girls in recess or whatever and play little girl games. I love to run, and I'm going to run, and by the way, I'm going to beat you. And she does. And the story begins with him saying, well, I'm going to try to be the fastest runner in the 6th grade. And he didn't think his competition would be a girl, but it turns out it is. And he's not happy about that for about a minute and a half. But then he gets to know her. And again, they see they have a number of things in common, including their sense of being outsiders and not understood. And other reasons she's different, I mentioned this already, her family, big city folks, educated, both are writers. So that would probably make them intellectually a little bit different than the people in the town. Um, you get the sense that they're pretty well off financially. In fact, the reason they moved into the farm community is not out of necessity, but because they wanted to kind of get back to nature and expose her to a different lifestyle than the big city lifestyle. And again, I don't want to put too much of a political spin on it, but that might be the kind of thing that a rich liberal couple might think, we want to expose her to a different lifestyle, live off, well, I was going to say live off the land. They're not living off the land, but it's one of the main reasons they moved there. They didn't have to move there, um, but they wanted a different kind of life away from the big city for their daughter. But it turns out, of course, she's such a fish out of water that she's miserable until she meets Jess. Um, Other reasons she's different. Oh, this ties in with what I was just talking about. Um, they are so into the let's get back to basics in nature that they don't own a TV. And this is a very important scene early on, if you remember. Well, I asked in number 8, what event makes her cry? You didn't have to answer that. But if you remember, this is I think the minute they moved into town, they were most likely the wealthiest family in town. And yet they chose not to own a television set. And for so many people, so many kids, particularly in the 70s, and I guess it's still true today, but of course, now we're talking about things like social media and whatever. But it's part of the social lifeline. My God, if you were a kid in the 70s and you didn't have access to a TV, I mean, how could you talk about, what's going on television and the favorite TV stars? And every morning during recess, you talk about what happened on TV last night, or did you see the big show with the big star that we all love? And if you didn't have a TV, you just were out of it. And this is usually a question I ask of a class, and I don't usually get too many affirmative answers anymore. But it used to be when I'd ask a question like this, I'd say, did any of you have friends or peers in grade school or junior high or even high school who didn't have a TV, didn't have access to a TV, or maybe didn't have access to the internet? And usually a few hands go up. And nowadays it's probably due more because of, I don't know, philosophy or religious ideas. A lot of parents don't want their kids to watch TV for religious reasons. It's not economic necessarily. I remember when I was a kid, I knew a number of kids who didn't have a TV, and it wasn't a philosophical thing. They just couldn't afford it, sadly. And of course, that made them a little bit separate, that ostracized them. Oh, you didn't see what happened on TV? You didn't watch, Star Trek last night, or you didn't see Batman last night? Oh, that's right. You don't have a TV. And a kid can't help but kind of feel left out when that kind of scenario happens. And ironically, uh, this is shown when she writes a really cool paper about Jacques Cousteau, and it turns out, or about, I'm sorry, about the ocean and whatever. And the teacher says, hey, by the way, there's a special on TV about Jacques Cousteau, the famous oceanographer. And I want everybody to watch it and do an assignment on it. And she says, well, I can't do it because I don't have a TV. And of course, all the kids who are probably much, much poorer than she is financially, just, have a field day with that. And it leads her to be embarrassed and humiliated. And actually, she cries as a result of that. So it's very ironic that, she's made fun of because she doesn't have a TV, but it's not out of economics. It's because the parents had a philosophy going on there. Um, we talked about why she moved here in the background of her parents and what made her cry. Interesting, I hope you noticed this. There are certain references to the Narnia series. So Leslie was inspired by The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and the book we read, and I'm assuming other books in the series. And it's part of her gift to Jess, that appreciation, that love of fantasy and imagination. And um, there is one, I have the book here, uh, page 39 in my book. Well, 38, we need a place just for us, she says. It would be so secret that we would never tell anyone in the whole world about it. It might be a whole secret country, and you and I would be the rulers of it. He says, okay, where could we have it? She says, over there in the woods where nobody would come and mess it up. There were parts of the woods that Jess did not like. dark places where it was almost like being underwater, but he didn't say so. And again, this is so typical and reflective of their two personalities, right? She's like, let's do this. This will be great. And he always is the one who has second thoughts, or he is the more pragmatic, or in some cases, afraid. I'm afraid to do that. I'm afraid to step out of my, to use a cliche, my comfort zone. And I think one of the lessons of the story is, you got to do that sometimes. You can't, you got to face your fears and do things that you want to do and you think you can't do or you're afraid to do, but do them anyway. That's one of her lessons to him, and we see it right there. I know she was getting excited. It could be a magic country like Narnia, and the only way you can get in is by swinging across on this enchanted rope. Of course, there's sad foreshadowing in that idea. A little further down, she named their secret land Terabithia, and she loaned Jess all of her books about Narnia, so he would know how things went in a magic kingdom, how the animals and the trees must be protected, and how a ruler must behave. That was the hard part. When Leslie spoke, the words rolling out so regally, you knew she was a proper queen. He could barely manage English, much less the poetic language of a king. So, she's born for this, but he feels reticent. Oh, I'm a country boy. I'm a farm boy. I'm a kid. What do I know? I don't know if I can do this. But she has faith in him. She believes in him and wants him to join her on this adventure. Let me give you another number. 49. 49. So it's kind of interesting that one of the books we read earlier serves as an inspiration to a character in this story. I think their I was going to say their love for one another, and certainly it is a love. But I think one of the interesting things about this book, and I don't know that you noticed this or thought about it, I think one of the subtle benefits of this story is that we have here, a boy and a girl, and they become very close. And by late grade school, middle school, um, certainly you start thinking about, girlfriend, boyfriend, but this is like a totally platonic friendship. I don't know that anywhere in the narrative, maybe there is, you could probably spot it for me and correct me if I'm wrong, but they're friends, and there's no kissing, there's no romantic kinds of undertones whatsoever. And I think that's a nice message to share too. It's like, boys and girls can be friends. They can be friends, and that's fine. You don't have to have all the other complications, so to speak. Um, that answers the age-old question: can men and women be friends without uh, the other things entering in? And this book suggests, at least at their age, yes. Let's not rush the romantic stuff. Let's not rush the sex and so on. A boy and a girl, very, very different, can be friends. Um, and it's reflected in their Christmas gifts to each other. He doesn't have a lot of money, obviously, but he's able to find um, a small puppy that he gives to her, which they name Prince Terrian. And of course, she's very well off. So her gift is very elaborate, but shows a real caring about what he's doing. And so her gift to him is the art set and the paints. And it's also significant what happens to each one of these, um, particularly what happens to the paint set, because it involves one of the stages of grief. Might as well talk about this now. I'm going out of order, but the stage of anger, which you know doesn't make any sense in terms of um, reason. There's no reasonable way why you should be angry that your best friend died, or angry at them, but that you can feel that way, and it's a thought that will enter into your head, and you have to deal with it. It's part of the stages of grief. He's angry. It's like, you built me up. um, I started to depend on you, and now you're gone. How dare you go? I'm pissed at you. I'm angry at you for dying. And of course that makes no sense, but it is one of those, feelings that you will have, that you have to address, and you have to move past. And of course it doesn't last long, because reason takes over and says, well, it's not her fault she died, for God's sake. In fact, it might be my fault, and that's where the guilt comes in. And I think it's interesting, this one of the stages of grief, it should be, for me, guilt, or at least it should be a sidebar, because I think a lot of people feel guilty for various reasons when somebody close to them dies. They have thoughts like, oh, if I'd only done something differently, or if I'd talked to them more, or it's my fault they died because, and then they fill in an answer, none of which is has any reality to truth. But it's also a thought, I think, that might come into play in many circumstances. It's my fault they died. I'll blame myself for this. And of course he does. He thinks, I should have invited her to go on the Saturday trip with Miss Edmonds, with us. If I had done that, she would be alive. She wouldn't have fallen. And it's my fault. But I wanted Miss Edmonds all to myself. Oh, and by the way, I might as well bring this up. You talk about unrealistic aspects of the story and dated aspects. I think those of you, especially education majors, would know that there's no way this kind of scenario could take place today. You couldn't have, a music teacher uh, call a kid's house on Saturday and say, "Hey, you want to come to watch some art with me? Look at some art with me." There's no way that would happen today. But we were a little bit more lenient back then. And I'm not even saying that's necessarily a bad thing. A lot of potential abuse could happen in a situation like that, obviously. So I'm not going to say it's good or bad. I'm just going to say it just couldn't happen today. But he feels guilty. But getting back to the anger, he's so angry that he says, the hell with Narnia and all these thoughts you put into my head, and I'm going to show my anger by tossing the paints and stuff into the creek. And of course, almost immediately he regrets doing that. But it's anger. And again, I think kids need to read about that. You know, it's okay to be angry. You know, don't let it consume you, and don't let it take forever. Um, but it's a response that may not be reasonable, but it's understandable, and it's part of the stage. I'm angry that this happened. I'm angry that it happened, or maybe even I'm angry at the person for dying. How could they leave me alone? Kind of thing. And that's the kind of attitude that children maybe are likely to have, because children are still the center of their own universe. So when somebody dies, it's like, how is this going to affect me? She's left me all alone. How could she do this to me? Kind of thing. All right. Now 11 and 12, I think, are my couple of my favorite questions that I think really make the story realistic. And I think these are questions that I don't know that children reading the book in fifth, sixth, seventh grade would really catch this subtlety. But I like to point it out for this class. One of the reasons I think this book is on banned and challenged book lists, and it is the whole way it handles religion, and particularly Leslie's lack of religion. You can't even really call her an atheist. She doesn't seem to have any real thoughts on religion at all. She's never been to church. She's never been to a church service, which is one of the other things that make her different from everybody in town. You get the sense from Jess that, yeah, we go to church every Sunday because that's what you do. In fact, I have a couple of passages here. Um, one very important scene revolves around Easter. And of course, Jess's family is going to go to Easter services, and he invites her. And on page 80 in my book, um, uh, she says, well, I've never been to a church before. It would be a new experience for me. And then the very next thing he says is, you'd hate it. It's boring. So again, just one other kind of subtle thing that shows that he feels like an outsider, an outcast. He just doesn't really buy into it. And again, it also kind of shows the idea that you get the sense that, they go to church out of a sense of obligation and not necessarily because they benefit from it or whatever. And I think this is interesting. I think this is an interesting part of the book where this girl comes in who has no experience with religion, but she's curious about it. She finds it very interesting and fascinating. She goes to the service and really, really enjoys it, much more so than the so-called believers who, okay, we're sitting here, we got to go through, she's really into it. And for those people who would, criticize the book because one of its main characters is somebody who doesn't believe in God or doesn't care about religion, I think they're missing the point. I mean, she's the one who she likes it, she enjoys it. Let me read some of this here. So this ties in with the other question about his mother's attitude about her. And this is something, again, I don't think kids would pick up on, but hopefully you did. Um, I don't think kids can probably grasp the idea that maybe adults are threatened by or even afraid of kids in certain circumstances. And I think we have that situation in this story. Uh, Leslie's family is of a different class, a different economic class, a different educational class, and certainly other people in the town might feel threatened by that, might feel uh, inferior because of that, might feel uncomfortable by having somebody who's so much wealthier than them, much more educated than them. And you get the sense through the portrayal of his mother of a people who are very proud. And it's like, I think one of the main reasons why she's not happy about her son hanging out with this girl is because she's so afraid that the little girl might humiliate her, might make fun of her, might stick her nose up at her. And it's like, we're proud. We may not have much, but we're proud. And I don't know that I could take a little rich girl from the city coming in here and making fun of our lifestyle. And so you can say his mother doesn't like Leslie, but I hope people went a little bit further than that. I think some of you did to get to the source of that. Well, it's because she's different, and well, you kind of get it through this. This is on page 82. The mom says she don't dress right. So that's the external difference. She doesn't dress like a girl. Um, and he tries to defend her. Well, she's got plenty of dresses. It's just that she doesn't like to wear them. Um, his mother's thin face drooped. She bit the outside of her bottom lip in a way Joyce Ann sometimes did, and spoke so softly Jess could barely hear her. I don't want no one poking up their nose at my family. I mean, there it is. You know, why would a grown woman kind of feel threatened by or even fear the attitude or the opinion of a little girl? Well, it's because we live in a class society and everybody's aware of it. And the mother didn't want to feel like she or her family or her little boy was being put down. Now, of course, Leslie is not like that at all, but the mom doesn't know that. And a little bit further down, we get more proof of my thesis. Um, Leslie looked decent. I mean, I think she was aware of this. So she was, you know, she minded her P's and Q's, to use an old expression. She was very respectful. Um, Even her manner was decent. Her usual sparkle was toned way down. And she says, yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, to his mother, just as though she were aware of Mrs. Aaron's dread of disrespect. There it is, you know. Um, we may not have much, but we have our pride and we demand respect. And Leslie maybe has an antenna and a sense of things that maybe Jess doesn't catch, but she's aware of this, right? And again, they go to the church service, and Leslie is all about it, um, kind of looking at it from an outsider's eyes, and she's fascinated by the story. Um, so, uh, one more difference between them. But again, I always like to pick that out because, again, I don't think we could talk about this to a classroom of sixth graders and have them really get it. But I think it's interesting for adults to talk about. And it's certainly in there. I mean, that page I read kind of indicates that. All right, well, Leslie does accidentally fall off. Well, the swing breaks and she dies while Jess and Miss Edmonds are out on their adventure in the art museum. And he goes through the different stages of grief. And this would be a good time to kind of bring them up. And again, I've already, in the course of our discussion, kind of touched on some of these, but sorry about that. I had a little glitch. Oh, and by the way, before we get to the stages of grief, look who showed up. Hey, baby girl. Hey, baby girl. Oh, she's looking, but you can't, can you see her little eyes now? Okay. All right. So Chelsea is not with me, so I can't screw up. All right. Talking about the stages of grief, here is that article. And I always thought that there were 5 stages of grief until, well, a few years ago when I was doing this assignment. There's actually 7 from Kubler-Ross. And I think the book does a really good job. As I said, you may challenge it on other reasons for whether or not it's realistic or especially in today's time and age and whatever. Um, but I think its handling of the stages of grief is very realistic. And certainly Jess goes through all of these different stages. And I've touched on, well, we've talked about anger, but certainly originally the first one is shock. When you hear the news, when he comes home and he's told by his family that what has happened, you just, go into a state of shock, right? And, this website talks about other things like when a person stays too long in shock, other things begin to shut down, numbness, coldness, sometimes depression. Again, the book indicates that this is a series of stages that, again, everybody kind of takes their own time in going through each one, but hopefully you do move from one to the next until you get to the end. Certainly, there's a lot of denial after the shock wears off. Then it's like, well, no, this couldn't have happened. And by the way, you know, this is something I would usually pursue in a classroom of students with discussion. I'm sure all of you, by this point in your life, have experienced this, the loss of somebody close to you, whether it was a family member, friend, neighbor, whoever, and ask yourself, did I go through each of these different stages from when I first heard the news to when I finally was able to move on after accepting it? And I'm willing to bet, I mean, you probably did. Maybe not all of them. And maybe each stage, I should put it a different way. Maybe, it took you longer to get through one stage than another, but eventually, hopefully, you did get through all of them. Um, Maybe some of you are going through it right now. I know at least one student in class recently lost somebody close to them. So they're probably right in the midst of this. So they particularly know what we're talking about here. But anyway, on page 104, well, 103, chapter 11. Well, chapter 11 title is no, exclamation mark. So that's the first thing. No, that can't be. The father says that old rope you kids were swinging on broke. They think she must have hit her head on something when she fell. And, the father just shows some sympathy. Um, no, she said straight to Maybelle, it's a lie. Leslie ain't dead. He turned around and ran out the door. Further down, behind him came the barripity of the pickup, but he couldn't turn around. He tried to run faster, but his father passed him and stopped the pickup just ahead, then jumped out and ran back. He picked Jess up in his arms as though he were a baby. For the first few seconds, Jess kicked and struggled against the strong arms. Then Jess gave himself over to the numbness that was buzzing to be let out of the corner of his brain. And so he has this moment with his father, who, you know, through most of the story appeared to be, pretty strict, but the father shows some heart and some empathy in this very important situation. But notice the reaction. No, you're lying to me. And then denial is running away, as if I run away from it, it'll make it not true. So literally, he does that. He tries to run away, but his father catches up with him. Then we see the anger in the story. And I mentioned this, but we can read the passage. Um, they talk about he talks about the service and the fact she was cremated. Um, and he's angry. Something clicked inside Jess's head. Cremated. That meant Leslie was gone, turned to ashes. He would never see her again. Not even dead. Never. How could they dare? Leslie belonged to him, more to him than anyone in the world. No one had even asked him. No one had even told him. And now he was never going to see her again, and all they could do was cry. Not for Leslie. They weren't crying for Leslie. They were crying for themselves. So he's angry at them. Just themselves. If they'd cared at all for Leslie, they would have never brought her to this rotten place. He had to hold tightly to his hands for fear he might sock Bill, her father, in the face. And again, you read that passage, and a child reading this passage would say, "Well, that's awful. I mean, you wouldn't hit, a parent, an adult figure." But they also can understand that kind of anger. And again, it's something that's not rational and not a good thought and not a positive thought, but it's something you're going to feel that. You're going to be angry at the other people in the person's life. You're going to be angry at yourself. You're going to be angry at her. You're going to be angry that this happened. And you're going to have any number of people or situations to blame, including yourself. Um, Jess, was the only one who really cared for Leslie. But Leslie had failed him. She went and died just when he needed her the most. So now he's angry at her. How dare you leave me? You know? She went and left him. She went swinging on that rope just to show him she was no coward. So there, Jess Aarons. She was probably somewhere right now laughing at him, making fun of him like he was Mrs. Myers. She had tricked him. She had made him leave his old self behind and come into her world. And then before he was really at home in it, but too late to go back, she had left him stranded there, like an astronaut wandering about on the moon alone. So damn you, Leslie. You know, you brought me this far, and now you're gone, and I don't know what to do. All right, so we see the anger. Now, of all of these, I've always had the hardest time understanding this and applying this. But bargaining is the stage where it says it's a kind of confusion where you actually look for ways or to argue or to reason your way out of the pain of the loss. I've always had trouble understanding that. Maybe some of you and your answers could understand that. I'm not sure Jess does a lot of bargaining. He certainly is depressed for an extended period of time, and it's noticed by his teachers, including Mrs. Myers. Um, and they notice here, out of all the 7 stages of grief, this one is perhaps the stickiest, meaning a lot of people get stuck here and don't realize it. I mean, yeah, this can go on for, the depression over the loss of a loved one can go on for hopefully not forever, but it can go on forever. You know? And again, there's no right or wrong answer to that. However long it takes you is how long it takes you. But hopefully, you're not mired in that for, the rest of your life. Then they say testing, things start to get a little bit better here. This is where you start to find resolutions, ways to move through the stages of grief to resolution and recovery. I think we see this in the story. He returns to Narnia, and that's a big step, and decides to keep it going. In particular for his little sister, who um, he makes the princess of Terabithia. And so you have, I think, a really sweet ending. If you've seen the recent edition or the recent version of the movie, it's kind of a combination of live action and kind of fantastical things. And it's really nice what they do with it. I won't give too much away, but there's a really sweet scene with his little sister, who's cute as a button in the movie, and he pushes her, and she's so devastated, and he feels and again anger. I'm going to take it out on my little sister, and this is a common thing, or maybe common in a lot of situations like this. I have to strike out at somebody. All right, who am I going to strike out at? And maybe subconsciously I will strike out at the one person who maybe in the back of my head I know that they will still love me even after I strike out at them. So he pushes her, he slaps her, and immediately feels terrible for having done that. And to, make up for that, to atone for that, um, after she follows him into Narnia one day, or Terabithia, excuse me, um, she shows him around, she shows her around, and she becomes the new princess. And the story continues. He doesn't let it go. He doesn't close the book on it. He doesn't run away from it. He's going to encourage his little sister to use her imagination. And again, it kind of shows that Leslie's influence will always be there, but it's time to move on, kind of accept it and move on. And there are a couple of nice little passages at the end I'll share with you. Very toward the very end, 126. He's kind of looking back now on what she meant to him. It was Leslie who had taken him from the cow pasture into Terabithia and turned him into a king. He had thought that was it. Wasn't king the best you could be? Now it occurred to him that perhaps Terabithia was like a castle where you came to be knighted. After you stayed for a while and grew strong, you had to move on. And of course, that could apply to the situation he's talking about, but it also obviously can apply to him moving on from her death. For hadn't Leslie, even in Terabithia, tried to push back the walls of his mind and make him see beyond to the shining world, huge and terrible and beautiful and very fragile. I mean, the real world out there, kids, you know, is scary and a lot of terrible stuff happens and bad things occur. Bad things happen to good people, but it also can be wondrous and beautiful and amazing. Uh, and you take what comes, the good and the bad, right? Now it was time for him to move out. She wasn't there, so he must go on for the both of them. It was up to him to pay back to the world in beauty and caring what Leslie had loaned him in vision and strength. So, you know, we we meet a lot of people in our lives. Some of them become very close to us, and we lose people in the course of our lives. And again, some of them very important and close to us, but they never really truly leave. They always leave a little bit of themselves behind in us that we can pass on um, to the people we come in contact with. And it's a never-ending cycle. All right. And then, but well, I didn't read what I wanted to read here. As for the terrors ahead, for he did not fool himself that they were all behind him. So, you know, like I said, it's rough out there, and there are going to be plenty of other terrible things that's going to happen. Well, you just have to stand up to your fear and not let it squeeze you white. Right, Leslie? Right. So, among other lessons, and there are a lot of lessons in this book, you know, lessons about death that we've talked about, the importance of friendship, the importance of going outside your comfort zone, being spontaneous, the importance of doing what you want to do, being yourself, and to hell what anybody else thinks, the importance of using your imagination and uh, not limiting yourself. All of these, I think, are themes and lessons in the story. And then this is the scene that ends where he's passing on this wonderful gift to his little sister. Um, and when he finished, he put flowers in her hair and led her across the bridge, the great bridge into Terabithia, which might look to someone with no magic in him like a few planks across a nearly dry gully. You know, it wasn't much to look at in reality, but if you use your imagination, it can be all kinds of wonderful things. Shh, he said, look. Where? Can't you see him? He whispered. All the Terabithians standing on tiptoe to see you. Me? Shh. Yes. There's a rumor going around that the beautiful girl arriving today might be the queen they've been waiting for. So, a nice, touching ending. He's gone through the different stages, um, including testing toward the end and certainly acceptance. And again, by accepting, we don't mean, well, it's over and done and I'll never think about her again and I got to move on. No, you move on, but you carry with you always those memories and those lessons that you learned and you took from that person who meant so much to you. And there's my Princess of Terabithia right there. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed The Bridge of Terabithia and its realistic aspects about how it handles the different stages of grief, keeping in mind maybe some of the weaknesses in the book that I would strike up to just the fact that the book's almost 50 years old now. But I think it still has timeless messages. And I think it's a good book for kids to read, particularly kids who might be dealing with this at the time they're reading, but it's good for any kid to read. So when they do uh, have to deal with a situation where they lose a loved one, and it's something that happens to all of us, um, maybe this book will help them be just a little bit better prepared. Or at the very least, maybe not feel quite so guilty when they feel themselves having irrational thoughts like anger, like being mad at the person who died. Like, how dare my grandma die? She meant so much to me, and now she's gone, and I don't know what to do. So I'm mad at her. I mean, that's not a rational thought, but it's something you're going to feel, and it's okay to feel that way, as long as you take a step back and eventually move on from that thought and that feeling. All right, that's about all I have. Get one more Chelsea. She's, as you can see, she's just fascinated. She hangs on my every word, as you can tell. All right, so on Thursday's video, we will talk about your precepts, which I'm looking forward to sharing. And then also we will talk about wonder. And I also will give you a final exam preview, and we'll probably preview historical fiction, which will be the next thing in the last week of class. So we have a number of things planned for Thursday's video. That might be one of the longer ones, but this is relatively short, so you can thank me later. All right, have a wonderful, well, this is on a Monday, so I'm doing it on Sunday. So have a wonderful beginning of your week, and we'll see you on Thursday. Take care.